I continued my journey with Valerie Taylor today by reading her first lesbian pulp novel, Whisper Their Love, which was published originally in 1957. It was reprinted by Little Sisters Classics in 2006, so that is the edition that I have here. And Little Sisters Classics is a series that I want to look into because I'm hoping to find more books like this one, more lesbian pulp if possible. Not that I want books exactly like this one, because this was not the best Valerie Taylor novel I've read, and certainly not the best lesbian pulp novel I've read. Because it has a little bit of an earlier publication date, it follows an earlier formula. It doesn't give our main character and her love interest the happy ending that we would perhaps desire from a romance novel. At the end, the character, of course, realizes her folly. Oh my goodness, I couldn't possibly be a lesbian, and retreats to a man. And with these earlier lesbian pulp novels, for legal reasons, in order to avoid the books being seized when crossing borders, the publishers kind of insisted that either the characters were punished for their actions, often through death in the end, or realized the error of their ways and had an educational moment, if you'd like to call it that, and got with a man in the end, which is what happens here. She realizes the, quote, error of her ways. So the plot of this novel, we have an 18-year-old. We have 18-year-old Joyce arriving at college. She's concerned that everyone is going to be more sophisticated than her. She's got an entirely new wardrobe, and she meets Edith, a middle-aged woman, twice her age, who is essentially, through her job as kind of house mother, I believe that's her role, she is preying on young women. We learn that Edith is not only interested in Joyce, but she's had relationships with other women in the past, and she leads Joyce to understand that she will have relationships with other women, with other girls in the future. And at one point there's a scene with a little bit of foreshadowing where Joyce realizes that Edith is preparing to take another lover, another 18-year-old girl, another young girl who has come to this college. So we get a picture not of two women falling in love with each other, but of an older woman preying on a woman more than half her age, a woman who is barely a woman. She's 18 years old. She's just come from her family's household. She's never lived on her own. She's never had a relationship with anyone. She's very vulnerable, and Edith takes advantage of that, and they fall in love, although later Joyce claims to have never loved Edith because she's realized the error of her ways. But putting that aside, so she comes and she falls in love with Edith. Joyce comes to believe that she can only ever love a woman, love someone like Edith, love other women, partly due to her rejection of men after being raped by her stepfather the night before her mother marries him. Although she doesn't call it rape in the novel, but from our perspective today, it quite clearly is. Her stepfather is more than twice her age. He essentially gets her drunk and gives the mother a sleeping pill, and once the mother is out, he rapes her on the couch, and she is drunk. In the narration we get the sense that she's a little bit confused, she isn't really sure what's happening, but at the same time there's part of her that was enjoying his closeness, but afterwards she just feels dirty about it, and she rejects men, and she runs into Edith's arms. Then later on, John appears. Now, John is a very cardboard character. He doesn't have a lot of dimensions. He shows up with explanations and definitions and textbooks. He is a doctor in training. He meets Joyce and explains to her that the feeling she's having for Edith isn't real love. It's an affection grown out of a state of immaturity. She only thinks that she can only love women. She's only having a relationship with a woman because he says she hasn't grown up yet. And once she grows up, she'll have a relationship with a man and marry and live a normal life. John explains that lesbians, people who are gay, people in same-sex relationships are only in those relationships because they haven't grown up, and therefore they should be pitied. People should feel sorry for them. And Joyce comes to hold those same views. John is a really, really strange, disturbing character. He shows up and almost immediately decides that he's in love with Joyce, even though she's rejecting him and rejecting men. And he takes it upon himself to explain to her how she will eventually fall in love with a man, and how he could perhaps be the one who will convince her that she can love men. And he says that he's going to marry her. It's a little bit bizarre, and we have this scene where John decides that in order to convince Joyce that she is attracted to men, he wants to sleep with her. He takes her to a cheap motel and they get a room, and I think I'm going to read a passage from here with him explaining that, just because it's so bizarre and it comes across as very predatory. Someone who's taking advantage of someone who's obviously quite confused and upset with their sexuality. So John shows up. This is their third or fourth meeting, I think. He keeps showing up. At one point she does contact him because, knowing he's a doctor and something he hinted at, she wanted him to explain why she might be attracted to Edith and why she might not be attracted to men. But the third or fourth time they meet, we get this scene. John says, "You know why women are frigid. They don't love their husbands, or their mothers scared them when they were kids, or they're afraid of getting pregnant or something." He patted his knee. That's creepy. It doesn't come built in. And then he says, "Okay, go to bed with me tonight and we'll see. You don't have to be afraid. I'll take care of you." And she is understandably a little bit nervous, a little bit freaked out, but she eventually agrees to it and they go to the motel. So John is overall a weird guy. So what we're getting in this novel are two lovers for Joyce who aren't exactly admirable or exemplary. We have Edith, who is essentially working at the college to take advantage of young women. We get the sense that perhaps she genuinely is into Joyce, but it's not something that will last long. When Joyce moves on, she will happily take another lover. And then we have John, who is worse. He shows up, he manipulates her and convinces her that her love for Edith, her feelings for Edith, are false. They're a delusion, and she comes to believe that she never loved Edith in the first place, even though earlier in the novel she was saying that the feelings she felt with Edith were like nothing she'd experienced in her life before. But thanks to John, those feelings are manipulated and set in a different light for her. At the end of this novel, I was saying to myself, is she going to be one of those women who is going to realize a few years down the road that she is indeed attracted to women and have to decide whether to uproot herself out of her marriage and choose a different path. It's hard to say because the ending is ambiguous. At the time it was certainly meant, oh yes, she's realized that she's normal and she's going to be a heterosexual and live that life. But I mean, if this were reality, perhaps she would, a few years down the road, realize that she had made a mistake and perhaps realize that she wants to be with a woman instead. It's hard to say. Despite the horrible characters that Joyce encounters, though, she is a very well developed character. She's an interesting character, which is what made this enjoyable to read, which is why it still ended up as as a good 3-star book. She has a backstory for most of the novel. Her motivations are clear until John comes in. When John comes in, suddenly she's dropping Edith without fully explaining why. I mean, we can imagine that social norms have come into play there, but it's not exactly apparent how her love for Edith suddenly got snuffed out so quickly. She even more abruptly is suddenly in love with John. One minute she is rejecting him, saying she'll never love anyone but a woman. The next she is running after him, saying that she'll marry him anyway, which was really surprising, but I suppose Valerie Taylor had to do that, had to give the story that ending, even though it perhaps was leading to something else. I mean, it's a sad, depressing mess of a story, but Joyce does make for interesting reading. The story does make for interesting reading. We have major hard-hitting themes here that you wouldn't really expect to find in a pulp novel. We have abortion tackled. We have a main character who is defending her friend's decision to get an abortion for most of the novel, who is describing the fetus as a bundle of cells, not a baby. We have suicide tackled. We have sexuality tackled. We even have rape coming up in this novel, even though it's not really dealt with as such at the time. Looking at it from where we sit today, from our perspectives today, we can see all these themes, and it's interesting to look at this as a snapshot of the 50s and see how all these issues were handled. Although, I mean, the way these issues are handled is really, really messed up. I wrote down those 4 themes here. And rape, John says, oh, she wanted it. In terms of abortion, John says, oh, she wanted to get pregnant. She knew how to prevent it. In terms of suicide, oh, she wanted to die since her behavior was so self-destructive. In terms of sexuality, John says, oh, she's confused and immature. She really likes men. So all those things are dealt with in very, very messed up ways that no novel would deal with them in that way today. But this novel does, and yet somehow I still enjoyed reading this. The one thing I do have to say is that I think this book is only for the most die-hard lesbian pulp fans. If you're just dipping in to check out the genre, probably don't read this one because you'll be very depressed. Read one of the later novels, one of the ones that perhaps gets a happy ending. The works of Anne Bannon do deal with some hard-hitting issues like domestic abuse, but at least in the works of Anne Bannon we get the happy ending. And in Return to Lesbos that I read yesterday, we also got the happy ending, which was great. In Whisper Their Love, not so much a happy ending, a very sad, depressing ending, which left me as the reader thinking this is not the end of her story. She's going to have some major issues to deal with later on in life, because she is obviously either bisexual, perhaps pansexual, or she's gay, lesbian. It's hard to tell exactly because she doesn't know herself, but considering how attracted to Edith she was, there's definitely that attraction there for women, and there's a good chance she's going to have to deal with that at some point later on in the line.